Myth is much more important and true than history. History is just journalism, and you know how reliable that is. Joseph Campbell.
Bending Not Breaking, Season 5, Episode 7, Beginnings, Part 1. And welcome back to another episode of Bending Not Breaking. I'm Sunshine.
And I'm Ben.
And we are full into Korra at this point.
Full into Korra.
The show, phrasing's important. Sorry. I mean, it is, and I misspoke. And anyways, we're talking about the show Korra, and we are much into the season 2, and I am excited about our special guest that we have today.
Me too.
Ben, who do we have?
Y'all, drum roll, please. Back for the 4th time on the podcast. This is the first person to come back for a 4th time. We have the one, the only, Indhira Udofia.
Whoa, whoa! Air horn, air horn, air horn. We'll put it in post.
Yeah, put it in post. Oh, Max.
Oh, he's doing great.
He is. Yeah, he's all
living life.
partnered off, living life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, Indhira, how are you today?
Great. I am doing fantastic. My cat just had a birthday, so that was fun.
Bisa.
Yeah, Bisa is now in her terrific 3s, and it's a journey over here. But yeah, finished another semester. We're one semester away from comps, so. You know, life is moving.
Life is moving. Well, everybody, y'all can go back and hear some of Indhira's past episodes. We have some lovely episodes in season 3 of Atla. We had Indhira on the Firebending Masters. We had Indhira in the first season of Korra. On Endgame, I believe.
Oh.
And then she was also here for our mini-series with Brene Brown and the Gifts of Imperfection, and we talked about perfectionism.
Who?
Yeah, Brene Brown. We've heard about her before.
Have we?
I recently got an article, this will be fun for our listeners, that is like saying, it's calling Brene out on the way she articulates shame and how it's potentially not as harmful as it has been used in rhetoric, which is really interesting, and I can't wait to read it because I want to see what it's all about.
Yeah.
Literally, one of my friends was like, "Oh my god, I just read this article for class, and they're all just not happy with Brene." And I'm like, "Send me the article. I want to know. Tell me more."
Yeah, I think I sent you an article about Brene the other day, and I was like, oh no, it was a Twitter thread, and I was like, see?
No, I read it, and that was probably one of the more important Twitter threads that I've read, considering how bought in we are as a podcast, but also I personally, and that was really enlightening to say yes, and it's important to consider where you're coming from when you read this material. So I really appreciated that. That was really helpful. So Indhira, for those of us who may not know who you are and have not listened to our prior episodes, can you tell us just a little bit about who you are and what you do, and why did we invite you back, of all people, 4 times? And I think just by hearing a little bit about your bio, people will understand.
Yeah, so I am a Duke Div grad, UNC Chapel Hill MSW grad, Boston School of Theology grad. So obviously I really like school. I am a now 2nd year PhD student at North Carolina A&T and UNCG's joint program in social work. I'm studying religious trauma and violence and its impact on African-American millennials and Gen Zers. I do spiritual pastoral care counseling and spiritual direction, work with folks who are navigating religious trauma. I work as a therapist, seeing individuals, and sometimes I see family systems, not as much as I did before, but navigating things around severe to persistent mental health. I'm having apparently I'm having an emerging specialty for folks who have some sort of dissociative identity or dissociative disorders. Things around anxiety and depression and trauma histories. And I just love the Avatar universe, especially Korra. I think Korra is the best Avatar. Don't fight me, and I won't have any questions or debates about it. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
And with a bio like that, like everyone should be very clear on why you are a repeating guest, because you have wonderful credentials and you like this show, which, like, I mean, who doesn't after they watch it? Let's be real. But it's one of those things where it's like the perfect combination of awesome. And so that's why Indira's back, y'all. She's the bomb.com.
Yes.
That and,
Yes.
and we like them, right? You know, like Indira. Enjoy having you on
Yes.
the show.
Yeah.
And
Also,
I like the host, what can I say?
Yeah,
They're
thank
fun.
goodness. Awesome. Well,
Beginnings Part 1.
yeah, we're talking about Beginnings Part 1, and we offered this episode to you, and you were like, within 3 seconds, responded with the lens that you chose. Can you tell us what it is?
Yeah, we're talking myth today and mythos
Myth.
as
Yeah.
a lens.
So, what does that mean?
So, myths often are stories or tales that try to explain the nature or the conditions of why the way we are. It's a way that we use storytelling to create meaning making and to explain the world around us through art, imagery, and kind of mystery. And so as we look at part 1 of New Beginnings, right, we see and we understand that in order for our beloved character to come back to herself, she has to go back to the beginning and understand who the avatar actually is, right? The first avatar. And so it is like their version of the creation story. And so there was just no other lens that I could actually honestly talk through that didn't include myth as meaning making.
Yeah, and as you were speaking, it really reminded me of our prior episode on the Firebending Masters, where Aang and Zuko are returning to the source of firebending, and in a way, this is the story of Korra returning to the source of her avatarness, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting to kind of think about how that history, and I guess as Joseph Campbell might articulate, that the myth around our creation and our origin is really important for how we live into our true nature, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes me somewhat think: do the stories we tell ourselves, does that count as myth? Is that part of like myth? The stories that we create in our head to process the world as we're experiencing it. How does that play into it, or is that a different thing?
I think that there are elements of the stories that we tell ourselves, right? But they all stem from a type of tradition or social or natural phenomenon that is outside of ourselves. I think, when we talk about myth, we normally think about, fable stories or the fact that it's just not true, right? And as we enter into the Christian holiday that is Christmas, right? This is like a big time where like we have to ask ourselves, was Mary really a virgin? Did God really impregnate? These type of questions. And it's less about whether or not it's true or not, but more about if it can represent a collective or a phenomena about how one enters and experiences the world around them. And so it's not just about how a person enters into the world, but how the world experiences the person itself, and how that is reflected back to them through this storytelling or this meaning making device that they're using.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things that I learned in class this semester in particular was, I am coming from a non Christian background in a very Christocentric education. And one of the things that was pretty heavily debated by students, not much so by the professor who was lifting this up, but essentially suggesting that we don't really lose much in the Christian tradition if the story of Adam and Eve, the origin story, the myth, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
if it's true or false, right? You
Mm-hmm.
can gain just as much from it by it being myth and from taking the things from it. And I like, to me, I'm like, yeah, duh. But for other people, it was like jaw-droppingly and very defensive all of a sudden. And so I'm interested to kind of pick apart why we're so attached to myth and whether it is true or not, or there are elements of truth in it. I'm really curious about the human nature of being defensive about making sure that myth is real, or does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because it almost makes me think, and this is maybe a little bit off, but the it's people find I feel that people protect and want to protect the stories that they've come to love, in whether it's traditional myth from the past, or if it's even fictional stories that are happening right now, right? Like the fandoms that protect their or feel like they need to protect
Yeah,
their stories,
yeah,
right? People get
Mm-hmm.
very defensive over, you know, who's a Skywalker and not a Skywalker, or
what do you
Mm-hmm.
mean?
who's the best Avatar and who would win in a fight, and those
Mm-hmm.
types of things that people feel ownership over some of those things, and maybe ownership isn't the right word, but protecting their view of the media that they've consumed,
Yeah,
and so I feel like people could also have the capacity to do that for other stories, real or not.
mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, one of the things that is scary, and I did cough and say Cora would win in a fight, just I'm gonna stand 10 toes down on that truth. Um, but one of the things that I think is really kind of important to think about, right, is that when you're experiencing a world, right, with a lot of questions, a lot of mystery, a lot of kind of unanswered or not neat, tidy stories, right? The stories that we tell ourselves in order to bring us peace or to bring us some semblance of certainty in an uncertain space are the
Mm-hmm.
things that keep us tethered to our reality. So if these things are not real, or if these stories are not true, that we tell ourselves in order to make us ourselves comfortable or make ourselves more at ease about the world around us, then we don't really know how to make sense of a world that is full of nonsense, right? So
Yeah,
I think a lot about how chaos works in a lot of the things that we talk about when we think about how if we think about like the work of like rituals and like magic
mm,
and things of that nature, right?
yeah,
There are some times where you will read or you'll talk about an experience and it really shouldn't have worked, but it just the circumstances just hit in a certain way, and then boom, something magical happened, right?
yeah,
Or how we enter into spaces that we can't really explain how we got there. We're just there, and now that we're there, we now have to create this story or this narrative that makes us feel a little bit more certain about our space and our place in the worlds that we inhabit. And so when we start questioning and wrestling and really kind of picking apart the story and seeing there's possible holes here and there, right?
yeah,
Um, then it becomes really, really difficult to navigate or hold space for, like, wow, like if this is not really real, am I real? Is how I
yeah,
show up in the world real? does it make it valid? The things that I've attributed worth, are those meaningless? And if those are meaningless, what does that mean for me? Right? What does it mean for the life that I've oriented myself around with the assumption that these things are true? Which is why I can't just say it's about myth, but it has to be about mythos too, which is a set of belief systems or belief structures that we tell and we structure around what we consider true or false.
Mm. Okay. We now have, I think, a foundation for myth and the implications. So what that means is we need to start getting into the episode.
Yeah, let's
right?
just jump on into it.
No.
No need to.
No, we're gonna have to recap this episode.
Do we?
Yeah, because I forgot everything, and I need you to help me remember.
Okay.
So, Sunshine, are you ready?
Yeah, ready as I'll ever be.
Ready as you'll ever be. On your mark, get set, go.
Fire Temple sages put Korra in a sensory deprivation chamber, and she sees past avatars and learns of Juan. You want more? Okay. One is riffraff who can't stay one step ahead of others, getting into trouble. But do they see a poor boy? No, siree, they do not.
Oh.
There's so much more to Juan.
I see
He makes friends with spirits after being kicked out of the city.
10 seconds.
Breaks up a fight with some other things, and he breaks up a fight with Rava and this other spirit, and chaos is loose on the world.
Went for the comedic route this time, I see.
I nailed it. I think that's the best recap I've ever done, and accurate. Fire Temple Sages did put Korra in a sensory deprivation chamber, and she learns the story of Juan. That's what happens in this episode. That is an accurate depiction, Ben.
I'm gonna start giving one sentence recaps and then doing whatever I want. See what happens.
Well, good luck topping this one.
I mean, it was very concise. I have to give it to you.
Yeah, incredibly.
I've been working to speak in headlines. It's typically my something I got to practice more.
Also, it's in tune with the genre. Let's be honest. If everything with Korra is pretty much a headline or a news story,
that's
revisited to us. So
very
you're
true.
on trend.
All planned. Totally meant for that to take place.
Okay. And all the Aladdin references, I literally wrote down that Juan was like Aladdin in my notes.
Yes.
That intro scene.
Very much so. Almost uncannily so. Like coming through the opening in the side of the building and giving people bread.
Yeah.
Giving animals bread.
Yeah.
Purposefully
Children.
done?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't remember like a half-human tree spirit in Aladdin.
No.
But I guess Genie could be one if he wanted to be.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
That's true.
Alas, we digress. Okay, so we have now been thoroughly introduced to this episode, and we now remember what's going on, maybe. So, Indira,
how could you not after my recap?
What's a moment of myth that you want to lift up for us to discuss?
Yeah, let's just start from the beginning, right? So, Korra is, knocked out and is battling for her life in the sensory deprivation tank, which I will not now refer to it as nothing but that. And the first thing that she sees is herself, and she has no idea who she is, right? In this like spiritual space, and the first thing you see is a wall, the blockage of between who she is and who she's tethered or connected to, right? All these stories. And the first thing they tell her is like, in order for you to figure out who you actually are, you're gonna have to go back to the beginning, basically. You're gonna have to figure out who we are through this one story of Juan. And so, I thought immediately, the reason why it took me 3 seconds was like, this is an origin story. And this is not just an origin story of, just Korra's self, right? Because that was what season 1 was for. But this is the origin of why the Avatar is the Avatar, right? And so, I'm going to try really hard not to jump between the both parts, because it's really difficult to do given the nature of the breadth of the thing. So if I jump ahead, I'm sorry, but y'all can reiterate it and look at it through another lens next week.
Yeah, don't jump
But
ahead.
yeah, but if you think about the total arc of the story, it pretty much starts with this idea of why the world is the way that it is, right? Which is
Yeah.
how most creation myths start, is to be able to kind of say, in the beginning, the world was this way. And then something happened, and now the world is this way. And
Yep.
so I really found it interesting that it started not with, in the beginning, there was this gifted person who just happened to have all these parts, right?
Yeah.
It started in the beginning, there was a scammer who
Yep.
was scamming his way to the top.
Yep,
And
sure
like,
was.
and I think that's absolutely cool, but it also really does complicate this like myth that we kind of had, especially when we come from the Aang Avatar universe, where it's like, hey, avatars are supposed to be like these pristine, neat,
Yeah, perfect people.
perfect people, right? Yeah. And then you have the first avatar who's by,
Super not
lack
perfect.
of, yeah, who's like a scoundrel, basically, right? And a lovable
Riffraff.
oaf, if you will. And I found that Korra is probably the most avatar out of the avatars because she embraces the fact that she's really not perfect and she's kind of stumbling her way through this avatar experience. So
Mm.
it actually gave me a sense of, wow, within like the first 10 minutes, you have disrupted all the assumptions and all the critiques of why Korra is like the worst avatar on the face of the earth. Because
Yeah.
if one is the first avatar and he's not the worst, then who is?
Fair. Yeah, I love the way that you're articulating this because when I was thinking about it, I didn't even consider what it implied about Korra. I was just thinking about how, this the myth at large, right? And not the
Mm-hmm.
implications of how it kind of impl- how it implies how we perceive, Korra's standing. And
Mm-hmm.
people are really don't like Korra often because of how uh, imperfect she is compared to Aang, and that's to put in, like, this sense of Aang was certainly not perfect, but in comparison, he made different types of mistakes, and
Mm-hmm.
uh, on screen, Korra's mistakes make her and put her in such a way and that looks worse to some people.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, one of the things I like about Korra a lot is that it really does start to dismantle that picture image that we have of Aang from Atla of, hey, yeah, he was the Avatar, and we all love him, and he was not a perfect parent or a perfect person,
Mm-hmm.
and he made mistakes, and there was trauma that was caused because of his behaviors, and I think that shows that kind of both sides of things. When you look at that at one side of um, starting out, making mistakes, scamming your way, maybe not treating people the best, but overall, like, you have the ability to learn and grow and develop, and or, hey, this person who was perceived as being perfect, good, had struggles and faults and things that we can also acknowledge. Like, this isn't um, it's not a binary in whether or not someone is good, bad,
Yeah,
and is
yeah.
that way forever, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of myths, right? Is that as much as that creates some type of like finite point for a deterrent, right? It also shows us, most myths show us that things are subject to change at a moment or experiences, that the only thing that is certain is uncertainty.
Mm.
And so this is another example of how this manifests, right? Is like you have these certain rules or principles about how bending powers came into be, right? And then it was subject to change. And now there's a whole different thing, which, we can talk a little bit more about kind of like how the implications of what that means and looks like. And then talking about how now when we think about the randomness of who gets powers and who doesn't, there's still some questions based off of this myth, which is why
Mm.
I call it a myth. Um, but I think that there is some sort of a semblance of having a sense of like, wow, this makes sense that, we had these set of rules. This one person shifts or changes the dynamics or the rules that are at play. And now the world is different and forever changed by this one person's actions. And like, it also makes the avatar kind of a scapegoat, but we need those. We need to have a place that we can point to and say, this is why things are the way that they are. Which I find it really fascinating.
So I'm curious if you can help us kind of parse out the difference between this being like history and canon, and for like this is certain, right? Because we're getting it from the original source, right? How more certain can you get, right? And so what's the difference between history and myth here? And I'm curious because is this history? What elements of it are history, and then what elements of it are myth, or is it all both, or is it just one? I'm like, how do we differentiate between the two?
So I am reminded of this quote, and I think it's Mark Twain, which the fact that I'm quoting Mark Twain is really something, where it says there's history, herstory, and then there's the truth, right? Like there's one story, there's another story, and then the truth is somehow in the middle, right? And so then there's another quote that I remember. I don't remember who said it. Someone can put it in the comments of, that the story of the history is told by the victors. Like the victors get to tell the story of why things are the way they are. So for me, as someone who looks at trauma therapy, trauma histories and narratives around institutions who create and perpetrate trauma, I never really fully trust a historical canon. It's always myth. And the reason why I say that is because there's someone's voice that's always not in the room when the story is being told. And a good example of this is when you read The People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn, which I read my junior year of high school.
Me too.
In my AP US. Yeah. Shout out to my AP US teacher who told me that I needed to work hard to go to school. Look at me now. But
so much school.
Right. So much. Working so hard. But I think that there's certain amounts of like narratives that we have to tell ourselves in order for things to be neat and tidy, but we understand that the world is not neat and tidy. So as much as we are getting the source material from Juan telling his story, right, it's still an interpretation of the events that are at play, right? It's still coded and veiled through his understanding and his experience navigating this world and making meaning of it. It doesn't always mean that our perspectives are fully and utterly objective truths at play. Yeah. There could be someone that's outside of it, right? Like I think about how the story may have shifted for the spirits, right, that were a part of the spirit wilds, and how they encountered and understood their relationship with Juan as Juan just kind of stumbled and decided to park for a little bit in the wilds. Would their interpretations of his actions be the same as what we were presented? So I'll stop there.
It's interesting to me who is telling the story, right? Because is it Juan or is it Rava who's retelling Juan's beginnings, but Rava's the connecting, thread through all the avatars, and so it's curious to say who's telling this story to Korra, and what perspective that brings onto the story as it's being told.
Yeah, because even if you think about Rava being the narrator, let's just say Rava is the narrator, right? Although the episode makes it really positive as if Juan is telling his own story.
Yes.
Even if it's Rava, right? Rava also has some semblance of trying to understand or navigate. I'll use her because it seems like she uses she, her pronouns, but that experience of a spirit seeing this like oaf of a human being really fumble the bag by like letting go of the wrong person and empowering the wrong person to kind of move in and through the world. And now like she's cleaning up the messes by training this man to like do the work that she can no longer do because she's weak. That also has a certain level of connotation, right? That may not be 1,000% certain or true according to her perspective, right? So like, she's making the assumption that if she dies, then obviously, the world will descend into chaos. Or if, Vatu dies, then obviously she'll become dark. But they don't know for certain. It's an assumption that's being made based off of their perception of what their worldview is. We don't know if Vatu got murked during the harmonic conversions, whether or not that would have actually done anything, or would we have a utopian society where there was no chaos or no darkness? We don't know. We're making assumptions as we go along. And even though we want to believe that there has to be dark and light to balance, that helps us feel better about the world and the nature of the world that we live in. It doesn't mean that that's actually the universal law or truth that's orienting our world.
Ooh, I love that a lot.
I hope that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense to me. I really love that, right? Because it is ingrained in our assumptions, I think, for a lot of us that, well, if we get rid of chaos, that means the world will be out of balance. And then all of a sudden, all these things will happen because we don't have any chaos. And then it's like, or that's a narrative that we've been taught through cultural myth, right? That has been passed on for generations to help us grapple with reality,
and through several different cultures, right? I think it's
exactly.
I think it's initially a Taoist point of view. Is the moment that you create light, anything that is anything that does not fall in that purview immediately becomes dark, just because light is created.
Yep.
And so culturally, you see how that shifts through different, areas, different people, even to now. And so, but it's one of those things that we've said before is it's always a red flag when someone speaks in absolutes.
Yeah.
And we see Unalaq do that throughout this entire series, or throughout this entire season. But the openness to like, yeah, I don't know how that's going to go, is always probably a better place to land than it is going to 100% be this.
Right. Because if you think about it, let's just, honestly speaking, if there is an absolute, right, that we could do, like, let's just say 1 + 1 = 2 is an absolute. We also know that there's some type of special math somewhere that 1 + 1 = 4. I don't know that math. I won't touch that math, but there is a math that probably says that, right? And then, so what does that say for everybody who knows 1 + 1 = 2, right? Does it make them wrong? Or is binary thinking itself a myth? Is the way that we understand binary, as someone who navigates the world as genderqueer, right? The idea of a binary has always been a false truth or a myth that I've had to navigate and make sense of, living in and outside of this system, right? This idea of, this idea of race, right? Race is a construct, which it means that it's a myth. Yet my experience as someone who has been coded as Black or African American, right, is a very real and tangible experience.
Yes.
So no matter how we move through the world, we are also moving through myth, because we have to make meaning for the things that we do, whether they make sense or not, and whether it's true or not.
And what I love about what you're articulating here is it's kind of like shifting our perspective on myth being not true. Myth can be very, very true, but what it's articulating, I think, especially from the way you articulated it around Juan's story, is even though we might be getting the information from the source, because it is only coming from one source, it is inherently incomplete.
Mm-hmm.
And so what that means is when you think about the world at large, when you think about all of life, when you think about all of the what maybe even more than the world, right? All you're getting is one perspective on what the truth may be, and that in and of itself is myth specifically because there is no way for it to be fully true without also everyone else's perspective. Right? Is that
Yeah.
one way to kind of articulate one of the things you've said?
Absolutely. And I mean, this is very like postmodern theory and can kind of seem very like woo up in the air. So I respect that, right? I absolutely respect that might be a thing. But I do think that there is a sort of incompleteness, and you can't capture all the stories, right? You can't capture the perspective of is it the
The choose,
Choose.
yeah.
Yeah.
choose, yeah. You can't really capture their perspective, although I really, as someone who like, is a stark anti-capitalist, I really don't care about their perspective, which
Yeah.
is also which is also a part of it, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Can't
yeah.
That's a
capture all
choice
the
you get to make, right?
townspeople. Right. I get to make that. I get to leave out certain elements of the story. But in light of the fact that I can make that choice, my understanding of history and experience will always be incomplete because I can choose to leave out a narrative or a perspective if I don't consider it valid.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about the implications for us, like
Mm-hmm.
implications for me, Ben, right now.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking about like it's what it's forcing me to do is thinking, oh no, what are all the assumptions that I have about the way the world works, and like I have to grapple with those because I have to realize that things that I might think of as certain really aren't.
Because it feels like what I'm going to call the cheaty trap from The
Yeah.
Good Place is if you get lost in the is everything I'm doing completely ethical and like
Mm-hmm.
making that is that you end up making no decisions and never
Mm-hmm.
accomplishing anything or never
Mm.
doing any so like because you're so trapped in the every if I have to think through every single instance of every single thing that I do, what does that actually mean about the life that you're living
Mm-hmm.
moving forward? It's an analogy I just came up on the spot.
Wow,
I feel pretty
wow.
No, that's good.
pretty good about it. Yeah.
That was great. That was actually really great. And I'm glad you mentioned Chidi because it is very anxiety producing to think about this from the perspective of like, there is no real truth, right? It can kind of create this nihilism, right? This is
Mm-hmm.
how Nishi goes, God is dead, right? So it's like this idea of like, there's nothing true. There's nothing that's ever going to be true. We're doomed as a society. Let's just lay and eat cartoons until, the asteroid or the aliens pick us up,
I'm
whatever
here
comes
for it. Let's
first,
do
right?
it.
you know, and while I would love to do that in this dumpster fire of the year of 2021, I know that that's not possible, right? Which is why myths are important. Because at
Yeah.
some point, you have to make meaning in order to move and navigate. Myths are not necessarily bad, inherently bad, right? They prescribe a meaning or they prescribe a condition and an explanation of a condition, but it also launches into a dreaming or a possibility of a world otherwise. Because if the world can shift this way by one person's actions, who's to say that my actions can't shift the world for a better one? Who's to say that I'm not the origin story of a new type of world that I can create, right?
Mm.
So, but that jump is a real big jump to have if you get stuck on what is true and what is not true. So what I like to say is what feels true to me, or what narrative or story feels good that actually will move society or move the world into a place that is more expansive and bigger for the people that I am in community with. So it's less about like, what is true and what is not true and how does power work. And then there's no dreaming or possibility outside of that. I can't prescribe to that and live in this world and accept all the amounts of debt I have as a social worker and believe that that's the truth, right? Like
Yeah.
social workers are constantly thinking about how to create and build new worlds. out of the worlds and the systems that we have. So, as someone who is, trained as a social worker, my job is to say, I hear your origin story. And I hear the agents and the people that have created these shifts in your life, in your story, or in your world. But just like they can shift and move and change, you too have the potential to change and shift your world for the better. So what does that look like? What are the conditions? What are the actions? What are the belief structures that are necessary for you to move from this type of world to the world that has you flourishing, the world that has you, having all your needs met, the world that has free healthcare, the world that has, you name it, right?
Yeah.
But you have to be able to have a story to know how to not only move in the world, but how to move beyond the world that you're in.
So a question that I have, because I tie it back to the episode, is Juan walks up on Rava and Vatu tussling, having their little tussle.
Just a little tussle.
Little wrestle.
Yeah.
Vatu tells this story, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Juan is, eats it up.
Help the spirits.
She's been keeping me trapped for 10,000 years. When it comes to these stories, these mythos that are in our lives, these tales from the beginning, how do we try to push back so that we're learning from the original source, we're learning from the people before us, we're taking that learning in, but we're also pushing back on what might be the falsehoods. The backup part of that question that may be impossible to answer is, how do we not only take in the things that feel good to us, but also take in the perspective of things that we may not like, if that means that it's going to help us progress, grow, learn, whatever that might be. How do we not get trapped in a bias chamber or silo of surrounding ourselves with only information that we think to be true?
The social worker educator in me is like dancing on the other side. So this is why I say I love the second question, and I'm actually going to use the second question to empower the first. So when we hear stories, right, and we start making meaning of things, it is very easy to find comfort in the things that feel true to us. So if we look at this experience of the tussle between Rava, Vatu, and Juan coming up and kind of fumbling the bag, so to speak, the reason why Juan moves and springs into action is because he can resonate with the idea of the oppression that Vatu has spoken about. Yes. It is directly tied to his understanding and experiences of living on I'll call it the fire lion turtle. Mm-hmm. As being someone who has been subjugated and oppressed by this group, someone who has been trapped in the cycles of poverty and exile, he over-identifies with Vatu's story and makes a decision that is snapped because all he sees is struggle and someone getting bested, right? He does not understand that there is something that could exist outside of his worldview, that there could be another alternative action at play in this tussling. He has set himself up to be this protector and hero, to redeem a past of, scoundrel and scheming. And now he is over-identified with this story of struggle and subjugation with someone who is given a part of a story because somehow Vatu could see that Juan really wants to be a hero. Yeah. And what better way of providing escape than to play to someone's ego? So one of the things that's really important as we are trying to learn is if the story inherently makes you feel proud and it comes at the expense of another person who is being subjugated or harmed or disillusioned by this victory story, then it's probably the wrong myth to believe in.
Well, can you say that again, please? Because I like it and I want to hear it again.
So basically, if the story that you are putting your faith and belief structure in makes you feel good at the expense of another party, another group, another worldview, another order, then it's probably the wrong story to believe in. The myths that actually have the most value are not cut and dry and neat. Everyone's complicit in one way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Right? So even when we think about Juan's story, Juan is complicit for the mistakes that he has made navigating through the world and fumbling as the avatar. Juan doesn't come out as the hero. Really, neither does Rava, because Rava's kind of a jerk.
Yeah, that's important.
Rava's got hubris. Rava thinks that she's better than everybody, that she knows best. And it's only when Rava starts getting weak, becomes weakened to the point where she can't, that she has to rely on. And even then, she still has hubris, believing that she can still do this by herself.
Yeah. And what does that say about us too, right? I think people are very similar.
Right. And people are very me included. Like, Rava is me. I don't like help.
Yeah.
I don't want you to tell me what to do. Like, you've already screwed up once. I'm not giving you grace to screw up again.
Yeah.
You know, and I've had to work on being able to navigate or hold space for the fact that, like, hey, sometimes people are not going to get it right the first time, but I have to be able to be willing to let people work towards their own semblance of redemption, even if it means that requires me to put trust in someone that I know is unreliable.
Yeah.
Right. But it also means that I have to get rid of my hubris to believe that I'm the only one that can do something, or I'm the only one who can say something, or I'm the only one who can read something. I'm the only one who can contribute something to the world.
This I love that language, because we heard that language and we've talked about it pretty much on every episode. But like, I'm the only one is Unalak's language. I am the only one who can teach you about the ways of, spirit, the ways of the spirits. And because even
if he truly believes that, even if that is something that he adamantly believes, that's a red flag. That's a big old red flag for me in the way that he's approaching life.
And it's interesting because even if it kind of reminds me of this also, the way you were speaking about this is what creates the notion of white saviorism as well, right?
Yes.
When people believe, like, talk about playing to pride and ego, right? When someone who is white comes in and says, "Oh, I can solve all your problems," it's a lot like Juan in encountering this tussle between Rava and Vatu. Oh, I can solve this problem. You do, and then it's just so much worse.
It's like almost every like youth mission trip.
Oh my God. I'll have stories offline about that. Just in case any of my field ed sites hear it, hey, still love y'all. But yeah, I think that there's something to be said about how hubris is always the downfall, right? Like the stories that we tell ourselves. Let's just think about myths in general. It's normally the failing of humility that causes the harm. Like, if we take the creation story seriously, and we read it from a Judeo-Christian perspective, right? I'm not going to say it's Eve. It's Adam's hubris to not communicate that creates the harm of the fall, right? Like, and the fact that he just scapegoats this person that's supposed to be his helpmeet, like, how garbage is that, right? Like, if we take into account like our own understanding of how this quote unquote nation dumpster fire of a place was created, right? Like, there was a presumption that there was no one here. It was the hubris that the people that were here who inhabit that land, the indigenous folks that were here first, were not valid citizens and had to be, colonized in order for it to be valid and true, is garbage. Like, there's so many parts of our origin stories, or the stories we tell ourselves about how the world is the way that it is, that rest upon the fact that there is some level of hubris, someone who's working outside of the realm of I'm the only one, or operating through the realm of I'm the only one, that makes things up things. And I think that that's part of the problem, is that at some point there's some presumed human nature component, the belief structure that we have committed, whether it's through our meaning making stories like our myths, or if it's inherent in us, if you believe that sort of thing,
Yeah.
that makes us constantly fail because we believe that we know best.
Yeah.
So sometimes the question is not if the myth is true, but what came first, the behavior or the myth.
Yeah. That's good too. Behavior or myth, what comes first? That's so important. Wow. There are so many things in this episode that we could really just pick apart, right? I'm thinking about
Mm-hmm.
like there's a lot of myth around like, oh, lion turtles, they're these like, perfect wise creatures also, but they're just as like they're the lion fire turtle alone was just like, all right, the choose decreed it, so this is how it'll be. We're just gonna follow through.
Yep, you got
You're
to go.
banished.
You're
Um,
banished.
Yeah.
and it seems like who should be in charge here? It seems like it should be the fire turtle making this decision, but it's the choose that we're on top. And it's like who's telling the story, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think about that. I think about I really love this idea of the first firebenders from which firebending really truly emerged were all outcasts from the
Mm-hmm.
fire turtle city. Fire turtle city.
Mm-hmm.
And how does that mythos, if that it was a mythos that is told, contribute to Ozai's view of what
Fire
the Fire
supremacy,
Nation
right?
needs to be, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah. I actually have been thinking about this, right? Because this is where I'm like, this has to be myth because there's certain plot holes. Because I really don't understand whether or not, because of how quote unquote random it seems that, these powers come from. Again, I'm not reading the comic books, I'm just watching the show because
Girl,
I don't have time.
comics are good.
I don't have time right now. That's a post dissertation project. But I think a lot about like, okay, so if these, first of all, the outcasts were all murked in the spirit wilds.
Yeah. Yes. Yikes.
They all got their just due for their own hubris, right? Of thinking that they know best and not listening to the man who's like, listen, the way you thought I was doing it right here, that's not how I'm actually doing it, right?
Yeah.
They had their own perceived myth coming into the game, and when the truth came in the face, they were like, nah, you don't know what you're talking about.
Not willing to change and adapt.
Right, like not willing to shift. So then I'm like, well, if that's the case, and the Lion Turner said, hey, we're not giving any more powers, then how did the Fire Nation actually come to be?
Yeah.
Because
Interesting.
they were supposed to give their powers, they pretty much gave their powers back after every hunt. So where did it show up?
What happened?
But that's another question for another time. And that's the problems with myths, right? Like we try to tidy it up in a neat bow, and then certain things just don't make sense.
Well, yeah, and I think it's really interesting to look at like the fandom, and you go back to the Avatar wiki, and they say this is exactly how everything went, right? And it's all based off and informed by canon, but it's also there's some assumptions in there that are just not questioned or critiqued, and as soon as they are, the first fan will come back, no, this is canon, I saw it. I'm like, you saw this one version of this one myth that may or may not be true, and there is a lot of truth in this myth, yet it is not necessarily the one and only truth.
Because I feel like even as we look at the mythos of Avatar, and we've talked about this before, creators' intent at a certain point becomes irrelevant based off of the impact of the work and how that grows outside of that, right? And so, all of this storytelling is going to evolve, especially things where, even when you look at larger fandoms, they may have more content out there, Star Wars being one of them. There are discernible facts, I guess you could say, in that world, but at the same time, there's so much that's subjective that really is just like, why are you so mad that someone believes that if that's giving them hope and joy and feels like they're being seen? Why are you arguing with those things, right?
And I wonder if it's a lot of the time when someone has an altering worldview based off of the myth that you're both operating from. What it does is it leads to, well, if this isn't true, then my whole worldview is wrong, and if my whole worldview is wrong, then I'm not gonna like it, and I'm not gonna be able to survive because this is the thing that's keeping me going, right? And talk about traumatic when you are so bought into a belief and you are confronted with something that suggests, not even like proves, but suggests that it is wrong. It suggests that you are wrong.
I think we see that. How do we recognize that? Because that makes me think of Iroh and June, and how many people thought that moment was funny and laughed at it the 20 times that they watched that they laughed.
Or Bolin and Ginger.
And correct. And then they get told, hey, that's assault. And now it's an immediate shift of, I've been laughing at that for the last 20 times that I looked at it. How do I process this? How do I respond? And typically it's fiction. Stop looking into it that much. That's silly. It's a joke. And you're like, no, that's not how that works.
Yeah. This then brings to mind, and I'm glad you said that it's traumatic, right? Is how many of our myths that we make are trauma negotiations, right? Like,
yes.
How many things that we tell ourselves? What are the idea of storytelling itself? How much of it is rooted in this idea of negotiating a trauma that we've experienced through this idea of narrative and creating a narrative that makes meaning or makes purpose out of it, right? So like I think a lot about this idea of and again, comes from theology, but it plays out into like everyday worldview, this idea of redemptive suffering. Like, I have to struggle in order for my life to make meaning. So the pain that I go through, the fact that I experience heartache and pain and trauma and disappointments and hurts, right?
Makes you stronger.
It makes me stronger. It gives me meaning. It pushes me towards my purpose in life. Do I really want to have a worldview that's rooted in the fact that in order for me to do what I feel like I'm led or purpose to do, it has to come from a side of pain versus joy? I don't know if that makes it good. But then if I discard this logic or this meaning making that has been given to me, this myth around redemptive suffering, then how am I supposed to make sense of all the bad things that have happened to me and the tools that I've learned in the midst of my trauma that I have now concretized as a part of my personality and my being and have used in my work? How do I make sense of that?
Man.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Again, this episode, like, you're
man.
Yeah. Well, it's
so just, what are we doing here?
Yeah, there's there's so much here, and again, I feel like this should have been something that we planned on like really unpacking. We could talk about this for days, and it's one of those things where like talking about. I'm just reminded of your initial intro actually, and thinking about how you introduced the beginning of this episode with you recently talking a lot about dissociation, and literally Korra is experiencing this dissociative experience, right? And how this story, this origin story, comes from how we dissociate from the world when things hit the fan, right? And so there's so much we could tap into. We are unfortunately unable to get to all of them.
To all of the things.
Even though I want to. We might have to have the dissociation conversation offline just because I'm interested. But we gotta do what we gotta do. But this has been incredible.
we gotta do what we gotta do. So, that's how we sum up everything. Just do it.
Yeah.
I feel like every time I come here, it's like, oh, here's a simple theme. I'm going to be able to talk about this in an hour. And it's like an hour and a half later.
Yep. Yeah. That's yes. Well, and that's the reason you keep coming back, is you keep on being like, let's Let's throw this little thing out there and blow the world up with this.
Well, and this is and I think this is what we're doing is we're discussing mythos right now, right? Not like literally because that's the lens that we're talking about, but that's what this podcast has been.
Yes.
And learning and the learnings that we get to take and move forward. And it's always super frustrating and confusing to me when people say like, you're thinking about this too hard, it's fiction. And it's like, that doesn't mean it's not meaningful
or
like
real.
We're told bedtime stories as children as a way of learning about the world around us and learning lessons and making things make sense. And just because something is fiction, but the reality is kind of what I feel like is what we're talking about is everything is in some way, shape, or form fiction because until you have the entire truth, which means that so many perspectives are being involved in it, then like everything is still only half true. And so now I'm spiraling into an existential crisis.
So here's what it is. But this week on Bending Not Breaking, everything is a lie.
Right, exactly. And so, but we've seen the power of what happens when you're able to focus and learn from the mythos that's being told to you, and diving into those things and the power that can come from that. And I think that that's important to lift up is sometimes true, not true, fiction, nonfiction, it doesn't matter as long as you're able to glean and grow and learn and move forward in a way that is living into the value system that you have.
Absolutely. This is why there's, that famous TED talk of the power of a single story, right? It's like, if we only hear one story, if we only see one side, or we only privilege one type of genre as the capital T truth, and everything else is just, a moot point, what are we missing? Art is the medium that ends up really reflecting the world back to us in a way that we can digest and interrogate without falling apart completely. That's why we have it.
Well, thank goodness for myth for keeping us from devolving into nihilism. I'm grateful. And on that note, we're going to take a short break, let the music tickle our ears for a minute, and then we'll come on right back. How's that sound? Everybody good with that?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. Cool. We are back, and we are going to dive into our next segment, which is called Yummies and Bummies. Yummies and Bummies.
I don't know how I feel about it.
Yeah. So, our highs and our lows are now Yummies and Bummies because y'all didn't like Nooks and Crannies.
Stop saying it, because I don't like it.
Anyway, we're trying new things out, and we're still waiting for our listener consensus to send back what their favorite is. So we're trying out Yummies and Bummies this week. All right, y'all. Yummies being good and Bummies, as in bummer, being bad.
So dumb.
It's so good.
I'm not calling it that. I'm not doing it.
You don't like Yummies and Bummies?
No.
Yum.
No.
Oh, that's so good.
I still like our Cameron ones. Yays and whoopsies.
We're doing great, y'all. We're doing great.
Well, we'll find a place to land at
we're
some
starting
point.
the new year off right. Man. Okay, so let's dive into Indira. Tell us about your Yummies and Bummies.
Okay. So I'm going to use peaks and valleys because I cannot mentally say yummies and bummies.
We have a
without
vote
laughing.
for Yummies and Bummies from Indira. And listeners, we're still waiting for y'all's input. Go ahead, Indira.
But the high of the episode has to be I and the Oasis, just because I love the fact that there is a space of rest in the wilderness.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
My bummies or lows or valley is definitely Juan's homies who decide to go off and create their own nation outside of the lion turtle in the wilds. Yeah, I don't see how you can be confronted with the truth that, you know, your assumptions are wrong and still be like, you don't know what you're talking about. That's that hubris that, you know, I just can't really rock with.
And it's
So
so
that's
hard.
definitely a low point.
It's hard because I also like empathize with the fact that they were under like this terrible rule from the Chews, and like I don't blame them for running away, but the way that they did it was just not great. So I agree.
Yeah, I just don't think that when, you know, and this is like the problem with trauma, right? Is that you don't often, when you are leaving a violent situation, if you don't do the radical work of shifting your worldview, you will become the oppressors that you escape.
Yeah.
And
Yikes.
that's definitely what happens in
What
this
a bummy.
particular dynamic. Yeah. What a low.
Yeah. All right, Sunshine, what about you?
I think my high is I love the.
You're yummy.
I think my peak, my
You're
yay.
Nobody likes the ones I come up with.
Nope. That's my low, actually.
No, it's no.
The bummies is the low.
Yeah. My peak, I think, is I love the expansive world of the spirits that we get to see, like the differences between all of them and the different abilities that they have, and how they are just ingrained in everything. And I think that is such a cool world to explore, and so I'm glad that we get to do that. But yeah, just the different types of spirits and the pushback on like that there is a binary of like good spirits and light spirits, but like spirits that just ebb and flow and exist, and I think that's really important, and I love getting to see that. Ones that we can view as negatives, like the hornet fruit thing that he gets to chuck, that aren't really negatives. They're just existing,
They're just
and people
living.
are coming in, like, you know, just bum rushing their space, and then they're not evil. They're just not happy that you know, destroyed their home, you know, that type of stuff. I really enjoy seeing all those spirits. My low is I every time I get a taste of Kuruk as a character, I'm upset that I don't have like a 10 episode series with him. And I want one. And so every time I see him, I'm reminded of that, and I want that. So I'm putting that out into the universe. Scary, R-rated horror Kuruk story is what I'm looking for. That's what I want.
If you're gonna get me to watch horror, that would be the way to do it.
But I don't have that, and so that is my low.
That's a bummy. Real bummy.
It is not.
Yeah.
It's a low for sure.
So my bummy is stemming from this reframing that you gave me, Indira, around Juan in like encountering Rava and Vatu, and the analogy of that being a lot like white saviorism, and how it seems like it's a total bummer that the origin story is based off of this instance of white saviorism. And sure, does Juan have redemptive qualities, and is this story one that leads to a lot of, you know, a different way of being for the world? Yes. And it's kind of a bummy that this is how it started. So that's my bummy.
A boomy?
No, Boomy's a character. Bummy is something that is low and I don't love about the show. That's the difference. And then for my yummy, things that I like.
Boomy could never be a bummy.
I like yummies. Yeah.
This is really stressing me.
It's like listening to a conversation with 4-year-olds.
Maybe that's it.
Yeah. And then for my yummy.
Just say it. Just.
I think that's worse.
I really love this. I love the whole like art style. I love the whole origin myth. I love this chance to learn about the history, myth of Avatar, to be able to learn more. And even though it's only 2 episodes, these 2 episodes are so crucial for our understanding of the world that is the Avatar verse. And whether it is myth or 100% fact, it doesn't really matter. But I love learning about it and getting a chance to um, learn more and know more. And these 2 episodes give us that. So I'm really, I love that's super yummy, super yummy.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, that's our yummy and bummy segment. Next time, since it's been thoroughly dismantled by Indira and Chunshine, I invite you all to suggest some on Twitter if you prefer a different label for this segment. Send us your thoughts on what it should be called. Otherwise, we'll keep on coming up with different names because it's seemingly fun, apparently, and no one can land on something that's useful or fun and helpful. Anyway, we're moving on. It's time for our devotion. And for our devotion, we are encountering the element of fire as it and the lens of myth. And we're setting an intention. We're setting a goal for this week around fire and myth. So whomever would like to go first is welcome to do so now. Anyone?
I can go.
All right.
So I am here repping for all the witchy baddies out there. As those who love the moon know, tomorrow begins our season of full moon energy, which normally means that it is a time for releasing and letting go of things in order to leave room for the expansiveness of new things to come. It's the last full moon of the year. And so I have been interrogating the thoughts, the beliefs, the myths that I have held true about myself that limit my potential and my ability to dream. So this week's intention / ritual is to write down the myths that I tell myself that may not inhabit the fullness of what I can be, and release those and leave them back in this year by burning them away. I think that it is a lot. We have gone through a lot over the past couple of years. As we are entering into a new season. I don't have to tell you, there's this real baddie, a real bummy called Corona that has really ravished our world.
What a bummy.
But a lot of it has given me a lot of room to reflect and to revisit certain things about myself that I don't want to carry into a new year. So yeah, that is my ritual intention devotion.
Yeah, I love that. And we are recording, obviously, before the new year, but this will be released in the new year. So y'all can channel that and think about that. We are taking this for this week as we record. But y'all can do whatever you want. Y'all can wait till the next full moon and do it yourself, right? Take that on.
Yeah. You can, every full moon is an opportunity to release and let go of something that doesn't serve you. It is not time sensitive.
Hear. All right, Sunshine, what about you?
So when thinking about mythos and myth and fire, I think for me, I kind of look back to moments where I have, especially around this time of year, where I have kind of cozied up with a book or
I love a good book.
Right, but there is such a warmth that can come with good storytelling and good stories, and there's a lot that we can pull from them and learn. And younger me was very adamant about when someone believed that a story was good that I thought was bad, I had to tell them. I had to tell them that was
your myth is wrong.
That's a bad movie. Why would you? Or that book is terrible. How could you like that? That type of stuff. And now I'm at a point in my life where if a story is not harmful, and doesn't have cause real harm to others, and someone likes it and brings them joy, and I didn't like it, that's okay, right? That's fine.
That is okay.
And so I don't need to pull the warmth away from others that they are feeling when they experience stories that give them life. And so
you're learning.
I'm learning. I'm growing. I'm kind of an adult. It's just taken a while. But I think that's my focus is especially this time of year, is to just really, one, for myself, engage with just great stories that allow me to feel the warmth this season, and at the same time allow people to do that, because it's not really my decision to allow anything, right?
Yeah.
I don't have, but adamantly not try to take the joy from others is something that I think, specifically around this time of year with fandoms and big blockbuster movies that may be dropping or have dropped, and just allowing people to feel that joy that the story can bring.
Yeah, for people who don't like Korra, who probably aren't listening to the podcast, right? You know.
At this point, people who don't like Korra have probably shut off our.
Yeah.
Shut off. They have unfollowed. That's okay. We'll keep talking into the void.
Yeah, the void, indeed. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's 2 down, 1 to go. For me, when I think about fire and myth, the first thing that came to mind was incense. And so I really enjoy lighting candles. I love, and I don't ever do it because I'm the type of person that you're like, oh, I want to have the candles, but I want to have them for when I need them. And then I never, but I like candles. And then all of a sudden, I have these candles that I never use because I'm like, but I need them for later. I need them for when the power goes out. But I never light them for joy and for, what it gives me when I light them. And it's similar, for instance. I like the smell. I like the way that it, creates a different kind of atmosphere.
Not those Glade candles, though. That smell is
No.
overpowering.
And so
much cinnamon apple. It's too much.
Yeah, agreed. But when I think about myth and these things, I think about how the myth that I'm telling of I'm gonna need these later, and how we are culturally wired often, not everyone, but I am especially susceptible to this myth that, I'm gonna run out there, that I have to hold on to this scarcity of there won't be other candles I can buy, right? And I'm holding on to that and not letting myself enjoy things that I enjoy because I'm saving it for a rainy day that has not come. I don't think I've lit a candle in over a year and I have a ton of them in my room, and I just never light them because I don't let myself. And so I'm trying to I want to confront these myths that I'm telling myself and acknowledge that there is some truth, that it's helpful to have a candle on a rainy day when the power goes out, and also acknowledge that the power hasn't gone out in 2 years for me. And wow, that means maybe I can enjoy candles more often without having to worry about that. And so that's just one example of a myth that I want to confront, and maybe I can light some incense and light some candles and sit in some silence and reflect on that and see if something else comes. And so that's something I want to do this week.
I wish I had such restraint around candles.
Or
incense. I wish I did, but I have burned I've gotten so bad that I've actually engaged into learning how to make my own candles because I burned so many. So
awesome. My dad makes candles, or used to, doesn't anymore. Anyway.
Yeah. We'll talk offline.
We'll talk. So many things to talk about. That brings us
to gratitude.
Yeah. Gratitude for funsies. Yeah, I love that. Okay, it's time for gratitude. Who are we grateful for? Who are we grateful for this episode? So there's a lot to be grateful for, I think. But, up to you. Who's up? Who wants to go? Chun-Chine.
Oh, okay. That I can do that. This is gonna be strange. I'm grateful for Korra. But let me dive into that a little bit.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
I'm amazed that her body is able to provide this healing in this way. She did not opt into it, but the fact that when her body needed to heal and she needed to heal, her body kind of told her and is doing this practice for her, and I think that that's a really incredible thing. And it makes me think, wait, my body kind of does that too. The amount of times my body has specifically been like, you need to chill out, you need to slow down, you need to rest.
Body knows what's up.
And also the way that it heals itself is just pretty incredible. And so it makes me grateful for the body that I have, and makes me want to use it in a way that is in support of that, and to be grateful for that, and to acknowledge the privilege that I have for the body that I have, and I think that that's important. So
I love it.
Wow, just at me next time, Sunshine. Dag.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
because the post-semester crud is real. Now I got to give gratitude for that.
Yeah.
Man.
Well, it really also reminds me of a book that I'm reading and really enjoying called The Wisdom of Your Body by Hilary McBride. Really, really cool stuff. And the gratitude you shared there is very reminiscent of what I'm reading in that book as well. So really lovely. Okay. Indira, you or me?
I can go.
Okay.
My gratitude is going to the spirit who governs the oasis. I am grateful because, you know, so at the time of this recording, Bell Hooks has passed away.
Yeah.
And I have really spent a lot of time, like Bell Hooks is like pretty much my North Star about how I understand the world around me. And I often say that she became the mother of a lot of Black feminist killjoys out there who tell the truth even when it seems like it's problematic, but it also pushes us to be better and to aim higher than we have before. I is that truth teller, that kind of killjoy. As all the spirits are like, yay, a human who like wants to learn. I is very suspicious. And is going to call you stinky because you stink. But also it's doing it from a place of love and deep protectiveness of not only the community around him, but just the relationship that he ends up cultivating with oneself. So yeah, my gratitude is to I for, being the killjoy that speaks truth to power, even when it doesn't seem like the most popular thing to do.
Oh, I love it. That's so much better than I would have said, and I love it. And thank you for lifting up Bell Hooks. Also, I fell in love with Bell Hooks when I read All About Love. Really lovely. And then there's just so many of her other texts and work is very worth consuming for everybody who has not done so. I highly recommend diving into her work.
Absolutely.
Okay, for me, I am really grateful for the childlike spirits that are in this oasis that are just like, oh, look, a human. Good luck on your journey. and they're just so like, super chill and like, oh, cool, a human. I don't have to worry about this because, I's protecting me. And I don't have to worry about this and that. And, oh, look, a human. Okay, bye. Go have fun. And it's just very at peace. And I love seeing how that looks, and we see a model of it, what it looks like to just relax in this what looks like this jacuzzi oasis kind of a deal where everybody's just relaxing and chilling, and then it's just like, okay, bye, have a good day. And how like I want to be like that. Okay, bye, have a good day.
It's interesting because, like, yes to both of the gratitudes that were lifted up by y'all, and one could argue that those are counterpoints almost,
They
right?
are, in a way.
And as we speak truth to that false binary, is that you can hold space for both of those, that childlike wonder and that childlike ability to be welcoming, but also that protective ability of like, I'm going to protect the ones I love.
Be critical.
And be critical and make sure that, you're doing that with inside your value system, but at the same, like, you can hold space for both, which I always think is important to lift up that. And so I love that both of those spirits, all of those spirits were lifted up for gratitude, because I think we can hold space for all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you can't have one without the other, right? Like, you have to have some type of innocence or openness or wonder, but you also, in order to protect that and have that to be something that can be flourished and cultivated, someone has to protect the innocence. So
Sounds
it's
like
a
myth
both
to me.
and, not an either or.
Right.
And it could be a myth, but just seeing how people are working, I don't know. Maybe this is one of those capital T truths.
Yep. Maybe.
Well, I've loved this episode. Indira, as always, thank you so much for joining us today. And And as always, we will invite you back for all the seasons that come from here on out. It is always just an absolute joy to have you.
I love to be invited. This is one of the highlights of my year of quarantine has been doing this. So thank you.
Absolutely. Anything else, Ben, that we need to do before we wrap up? And Indira, before we do you want to shout out any places you want people to follow you or find you, or and you can abstain from that if you want to, but is there a place that you would like for people to kind of experience what you're putting out into the world?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter at BLAQ Trauma Nerd. So that's Black with a Q, Trauma Nerd. On Twitter, you can go to my website, www.imudofia.com. I'm actually going to do some updates, doing some really fun education stuff this year, teaching in certain places. And so I'm really excited about the programs and things that I'm developing. So follow me there if you want to know more information.
I love it. I am following on most of my accounts, if not all of them. Pretty sure on all of them.
All three of the Twitter accounts that exist.
Pretty much.
Highly recommend. That's how I found out about all the articles that you are like, you should read this. And of course, I read them quickly. Anyway, here we are. You can also find Bending Not Breaking online. You can find us at all of the things at BNB_pod. That's Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Patreon, which we would love your support for. That'd be cool. Especially, around the holidays, it's a little after the holidays now, but the holidays are perpetual when you give to us, right? It's a holiday every time you give. But financial giving is not for everybody. So if you don't feel comfortable doing that, no pressure, just a little pressure, but no real pressure. And remember, you can always give us
ad
a
ever.
lovely review in lieu of that. We would love that as well. But really what matters most is your joy from listening to this and telling your friends and having the conversation. So feel free to join our Facebook page also, where we can talk about the episodes.
That's right. Big thanks to all of our listeners, our Patreon supporters, and of course Indira for being with us today. I'm Sunshine Mayfield.
This has been Pruitt.
And this has been Bending Not Breaking. Thank you for listening.
Bye.
Bye.